All right, so my talk is on the cloud ecosystem, implications for incident response, digital forensics and incident response, which is my background. So I'm a senior security researcher at Obsidian Security. I have an undergrad degree in criminal justice with a minor in computer science and a master's degree in digital forensics. I've done a stint at a number of different companies. I've done contracting and worked on a contract for the Treasury Department. I've done a couple places, digital forensic consulting. I've worked at a startup, which was then later acquired, and now obviously Obsidian. So I just an intro here, start with why. I don't know if you've read this book, but I recommend the audio book. The author is the one who actually reads it, and he has a British accent, so it's kind of fun to listen to. But it just, it kind of changes the way you think about things, but the premise is why we do things, to try to answer that question. And so they give the example of Apple, and we're talking like Apple in the early days. I know we've been around Apple for a long time, so we kind of take it for granted now. But in the early days, it was really innovative, and because they started with their why, we want to challenge the status quo, think differently, and as a result of that, we're going to build really cool products. So that's just a different way of thinking about things. So when you apply that to cloud, you have to understand that cloud is actually a representation of something else, right? There's an underlying cultural value to that. And so basically a shifting in boundaries. So cloud is a technological representation of a cultural paradigm shift, a purposeful discarding of boundaries in favor of a quantum leap in how our society interacts and solves problems. So it's really interesting that there is something more to cloud, and cloud is actually just the result of that. So things like open source, API first, the sharing economy now create this sort of innovation in connection and collaboration, or like I like to call the fluffy unicorn. So I think we're going to see really cool things as a result of this change in our values, just the way we interact. So I wanted to talk about then versus now, but really then's not very interesting because we've been there and we kind of all probably remember. So the idea is that applications used to live on individual workstations and were hosted internally to an organization. And now applications live in the cloud. You can access your data from anywhere. And more than that, services today are sort of built with connection in mind. So really, because of things like open source and in API first, it means that a lot of businesses sort of stood up quickly that cover all different aspects of a business in terms of their processes. And basically, companies are now picking a cloud stack of business services for their businesses. So something that I think is really interesting about this, this change in the way we do things, is that as you see, right, there's a ton of companies on the list. I just kind of wanted to focus on a few of the more prominent ones. But all of these basically have integrations for each other. So G Suite can integrate with Salesforce and Dropbox and Box and so on. Just to give you an idea, it's because they offer an API, and a lot of those other services do. And so now it kind of creates this very interesting ecosystem that we live in. So if you graph that out, you actually get something kind of interesting, where now we're able to connect these applications in a way that we weren't before, essentially creating data portals that allow for the transformation and transmission of data between platforms. So as an incident responder, a forensic person, that gives me a heart attack. Whereas I'm thinking, oh my God, the data's everywhere. If I have to track down an intruder who's broken into Slack, I now have a bunch of different places I have to look to see what they did. But it also, right, it helps individuals work better and work faster. And I think different organizations will set up their stack differently, and whether they actually want to implement the connections or not. But I do think it's interesting. So just, as an example, within Slack, you can pull in files from Dropbox, pull in files from Box. You can do lookups with Salesforce to get your account information or your contacts, which is kind of convenient and cool. For the most part here, and I kind of indicate there, we're just sharing links, okay? So we're not really passing data around, we're just sharing links to that data. Then you click on the link and it'll redirect you to the actual service. But And depending on how the integration is actually set up, it's like you're pre-authenticated. So often, you log into Slack one time, and once the connection has been established with something like Dropbox, you're always able to go after and access that file. Super convenient for the user, right? Like, super convenient for the attacker as well. So and in this age where we're dealing with a lot of phishing attacks, sort of the front door or the barrier to entry is that login password, right? Those login credentials. So let's see. Over here we have integrations inside of Office, like Office, like Microsoft Word itself. You can pull in data from Box or Dropbox, and there you're actually pulling in files, right? So you're pulling in a copy of your file for your Word document or whatever. So I just think that's interesting. And then over here, I just want to remind everyone that now these applications live on all of your devices. So now the data is on all of your devices. So very interesting. And then also there are additional marketplace plugins. So just to be aware of the implications there. So just an example of some of the integrations that are possible. Up here we have integrations with Salesforce, Gmail, and Box. So very exciting. In Salesforce, you can email yourself. It'll open this separate window, and then you can pull in a file from Box. And again, that's just a link that you're pulling in. But it's just interesting, right? Like all from one platform. Because of these integrations, you can do that very complex thing. Slack, right, allows you to pull in files from all of these different cloud storage services, and then also to create documents. So that was a new one that I didn't really realize. But you can create Google Docs documents. And so obviously the Google Docs documents are being left in Google Drive, and then a link is just being passed into Slack. So that's kind of cool. And then Outlook and Dropbox here is another integration. You can pull in your Dropbox link, but just to give you an idea of what's possible. So, what does this mean for incident response and forensics? Often we're investigating two different types of things when we're in that space. So in incident response, we're looking at the attacker, what did they do on the system? What data did they access? In forensics, often you're dealing with something like an insider threat. So, a user who left the company and was unhappy, often there's this question of, did the user take data with them when they left? So those are common questions. And so how do we address that in this new sort of ecosystem? It's very interesting, right? I think it's an interesting problem to try to trace through an ecosystem, or when you think about an insider threat, now there's 1,000,001 ways to get data out of your organization if you want to take something when you leave, right? And as a forensic professional, I often investigated those types of things, and we get their computers and workstations. We have to look for artifacts on the system itself to say, oh, they use their Gmail, or oh, they, whatever else they did. But and now actually they're starting to take people take screenshots, right? Or they'll take a picture of documents they want to take, which is difficult for us because we can't just search a computer for that kind of information. We have to visually look at the pictures. So it's interesting. But it also brings up the question, how is data flowing in this ecosystem? And so it kind of just led me to the realization that really data flows from data creation apps to different storage locations, both in the cloud and then on your personal devices, work or personal devices, via internal, external sharing platforms, or in internal, external sharing platforms via links, documents, and shared workspaces. So that's something that's really interesting when I was doing this research. There's actually a lot more sharing that's possible than I realized. So as an example, Box has something called collaborators. And so you can basically invite someone else into your organization to share and collaborate in your space. And then I noticed Slack is creating something called, I think it's called shared channels. So the idea is that you can connect your Slack instance with someone else's Slack instance, like a different company, and now you can collaborate, right? But share. But it's just very interesting, the implications of that. We're sharing data in different ways and working differently. Okay, so to me, I always ask these questions how do those events get logged? Do they get logged? You kind of expect that on the system that that where the activity was being generated, that there would be some sort of log. But when that document or that data leaves and goes into another system, is there an event that gets recorded? Do you know that that's happened? And so it was interesting to dig into that. And so here we see an example of like what the user's action would be. I think this is in Box. They just happen to have a better user interface, so I thought it was a better graphic to show you. But if you want to edit a document in Google Documents, it does create a log entry, which is really cool. So this is the log entry that gets created. You can also see that, like here, the first log entry, I added the application to Box. So anyway, so when you edit the document, obviously it shows here Google internal upload service. So that shows you that you're editing with Google Docs. It goes into Google Drive, and you're editing the document. So that's cool. Here's another event a test event that I generated. So the integration, this is Salesforce. The integration with Salesforce was like a template. So they have like a template for the account, and then you create a new item in that template for Box to live. So this is where Box lives in that. But it means that whenever you create a new account, just by default, it will create a new Box entry in the log. So that was kind of interesting and cool to see. So here you see the creation of the account, and then you see Box, right? Box for Salesforce. A new instance of that was created. So that's kind of cool. If you didn't have Salesforce logs, which ironically you don't. I was looking for more detailed Salesforce logs, and it's actually possible that the API will pull more information. But if you don't have that, and you have this Box plugin, you can go look at the Box logs to get it. So that's kind of cool. Another example with G Suite. So, we're in G Suite. Actually, this is Box. This is Box again. But in Box, you can create, with the integration to G Suite, you can create a new Google document. The document simultaneously gets saved to Drive and Google Drive with one version that I tested. And so that's interesting. And then it does create, Google creates very nice logs here. Look at that. You have a creation event, an edit event, a view event. So that's really, really interesting, great information. Let's see. I didn't actually try to compare if Box has the same level of detail, but at least you could go to Google for it. So just something else I wanted to look into was metadata. It's something that forensic professionals often rely on. Often you're given a document and you want to know more information about it. So as an example, an insider threat instance, maybe you find a document on their thumb drive and you want to tie it back to the original company. Did this document originate with this company? Is it proprietary? Well, you're going to look at metadata. So it's interesting. Two instances here. We have a Google presentation that was created from Box and then downloaded from Google Drive. So Google does a great job with creating more metadata for you. So they tell you not only that it lives in Google Drive, but that it was originally from Box, that you created the document or you linked to the document through Box. So that's kind of cool. In terms of a document, if you just download it directly from Box, this is the metadata that you get. And I'm sure if you base60 decoded or did some sort of magic, you might get more interesting information from the metadata. But just as a general, it can kind of tell you the source of a document. What's that? Where do you usually? View info on my Mac. Yeah. There's way better tools though, and there's probably more interesting embedded metadata. But I kind of just ran out of time to do that more detailed analysis. Right. Okay, right. It would be stored with the document, right? So you'd theoretically, if you true. Okay, that's fair. Yeah, that's fair. Your forensics will go better if it was a Mac. What? Yeah. Yeah, good question. This this was a sneaky way. Technically, Obsidian is working on a way of sort of normalizing logs from different cross-platform events, and so this was a view, and it just happened to be easier than going natively to Google's logs, but they do have them. What I would say is that the logs via the API are way more robust. They have like very detailed activity events like creation, edit, view. I mean, I don't think people realized that that's so different than the way things used to be, where applications on your desktop, if you created a new document, if you viewed it, edit, none of that stuff is getting logged, right? You're looking at, as a forensic person, you're looking at system events, right? Timestamps, changes, things like that. But because cloud is so different and everything's logged, you get these really interesting events where you're like, you can see everything that happened with that document. So it's cool. Like I think it's cool. Okay, so in the end, maybe it's not that bad. Like there's a lot of different ways you can collaborate now, and in terms of like there are implications for incident response and forensics, but it could be a good thing in the end. So like I said, I haven't really pulled through and looked through all the data that comes through the API, but it is more robust. For example, in incident response cases, a lot of times they're dealing with Office 365 intrusions, right, where it's a phishing attack, and the attacker goes in and they create like a mail forwarding rule. That's their classic, so that they can sort of exfiltrate data. But Office 365 by default doesn't have audit logging enabled, right? So the admin has to go in and enable audit logging for you to even have those logs, even though like underneath the events are still getting recorded, which is really annoying, especially in an intrusion after the fact you didn't know to turn on the audit logs sooner. So often you don't have the specific line entry that shows you when the mailbox rule was created. Which is important because you want to like time it out. You want to know how long has this intrusion happened. And if you don't have audit logs going back, if you don't have audit logs at all, 1, 2, they only go back 90 days by default. And so you just want to know when was this mailbox rule created. Well, via the API, there are actually more detailed logs that you can get. Not just logs, but you can get metadata on like state items. So like the state of the user itself or the user objects. That are being stored. So that's very interesting too to me. Where there's it's just a difficult field in general, right? And so now we might have some additional data sources to work with, and so not everyone is programmatically savvy. And so hopefully there are coming tools, right, that can better help us get access to that data. So yeah. Yeah, I did. I tried to do as much manually as possible, and I didn't try to use our tool. Like, but yeah, I'm sorry. Right. Right. By the API. So I do have it. I don't have it on a slide. Right. So each service offers a number of different APIs. One of them are like activity events. So those are like the most useful. It's just a stream of every single event that happens. You can also pull just state data. So you can just pull like user mailbox information, just whatever's in their settings right now. You can just pull that. So each service does have, and I would say it varies, right? Like Google's APIs are great. Their documentation is great. There's even like an interface where you can just play with the API, so you don't even have to write anything. It's like an API explorer. So you just sort of like you connect it to whatever instance that you want to pull from, and you'll type in, whatever endpoint you want to pull from. So it is very cool, like where we're moving. So in conclusion, I guess what I've come to realize is that that this new ecosystem might not be so bad, that it actually means that we can collaborate and share things on a different level. So more than ever before, I think the powerful desire for change is outpacing our desire for recognition and profit. It means we're more comfortable like sharing this information. Instead, now we're reaching for satisfaction and knowing that our work can contribute to changing the world. So I do think there are good things to come. All right, that's it.
Any other questions? We got one question here in the back.
Yeah, go ahead. Right. Yeah. It's really it depends on the service, right? In terms of the level of logging that they even provide, that just assumes you are already pulling the API data. And I haven't really fully done that research to see, are we getting every single event that would be useful? I think as an example, like those cross-platform events, I really only showed you a couple examples where there were logs for cross-platform events, but often there isn't, right? If an attacker is in your Slack and can then access Dropbox, you're going to see an event in Slack and you're going to see an event in Dropbox. I think the other interesting thing with integrations is that they can be connected and disconnected at will. So if you connect the integration and an intruder comes in, they do a bunch of stuff, and then you don't know, and then you disconnect the integration, you might not realize that now you have logs in two places that might help you with the intrusion, but you forget that you disconnected the integration. So I do think your picture could potentially be incomplete if you didn't really check all of the integrations or didn't have a history of them. So I just think it's interesting space, right? Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. Mm. Mm. Oh, okay. So, well, you were talking about watermarking documents. What do you mean? Um, what's that? A honey token. Yeah. Well, okay. So, yeah. So he's asking about watermarking documents, and then if there's a way to tell, yeah, if an intrusion has happened based on and it's been leaked, your data has been leaked out. I mean, often in the forensic world, there is creation metadata, like for local application installations. When you register the application to your company, your license to your company, that's an embedded metadata event, so that lives with your document. So that's kind of the closest thing to a watermark that's currently existing. I mean, you could implement your own, which would certainly be very interesting. But yeah, no, it's interesting, right? If data leaks online, you wouldn't necessarily know it's yours or the source of the information. You might just find a cache of data. You wouldn't be able to tie it back to the original owners. So yeah, I think it's very interesting, worth research. Any other questions?